maybe.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon or whatever time of day it is, wherever you happen to be located. I'm Kurt Andersen. I'm the SRE Architect here at Blameless, and we are excited that you're joining us for this webinar on SLOs. Before we dive into the topic at hand, let's run through and introduce the other panelists. Nicolas.
Yes, thank you, Kurt. I'm Nicolas Philip, Director of Product here at Blameless. Dan?
Yeah, Dan Genzale. I'm Director of Infrastructure at Blameless. And over to Dylan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dylan Owens. I'm an engineering manager for the SLO team. To Paul.
And I am Paul Chu, sales engineer. I'm not a panelist, but I'll be walking you through the SLO UI.
You're an important part of our event, Paul, so we're glad you introduced yourself. So we are very excited to introduce the new general availability release of our SLO Manager product on the Blameless platform. This helps teams to understand reliability from the perspective of their customers. With SLOs, teams can create distinct user journeys that correspond to their services, monitor those user journeys through the SLO Manager, and then gain actionable insights through the error budget reporting. Blameless error budgets help you understand how much unreliability your services have experienced over a given time period, and then predict when they are going to run out. And then you can look at your services and sort them out by risk levels and take appropriate actions before your customers are too adversely impacted. We will have a demo, as Paul mentioned, later in the session. And in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about what SLOs are, what user journeys are, what all these terms are that keep coming up whenever you listen to one of these events. So let's start with what are SLOs? Nicolas, do you want to talk about that and why people should care about them?
Sure, Kurt. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. So as everybody knows, SLO stands for Service Level Objectives. And for many years, IT operators have been attempting to monitor, and watch the reliability of their production environment. And now more and more services are running 24/7, and they're being used by their customers from all around the world. So whether your SaaS application or services are deployed in the cloud or on premise, an SLO is basically a reliability target that your engineering and SRE teams are setting for themselves to track the happiness of their customers. And that's the quick answer to what an SLO, what SLOs are. But now, as I mentioned earlier, we live in a world of services that must run 24/7. So depending on the industry you work in, onboarding, ongoing user experiences, and customer retention are business critical concerns of your organizations, and they directly affect your bottom line. So in fact, reliability has become priority number one for your organization for those reasons. And reliability means that you're delivering the services with the expected quality of service that you sold and promised to your customers. So the best practice that we've learned from high quality SRE teams is to monitor the reliability using the concept of SLOs that we will talk more about, and also the more advanced error budget, a more advanced indicator called the error budget.
So there have been lots of talks about SLOs over the last few years in very many different venues, online as well as in person. And as a matter of fact, there's even an entire conference that's being scheduled later this month. I will make a pitch here for SLO Conf. It's going to be May 17 through 20. Anyone who's interested in hearing more about SLOs should go and sign up. But why is it so difficult? The way you describe it, Nicolas, sounds really kind of simple. So maybe Dan from our own infrastructure team can talk about some of the complexities involved.
Sure, and let me just start by alluding back to the 24/7 nature that Nicolas was discussing. We all recognize that we live in a 24/7 world, but what we have to also appreciate is that 100% uptime is not a reality, and it's not even a valid target. So by extension, we have to establish some target. We have to establish a reasonable, healthy target, and that can't be arbitrary or just best effort or as close to 100% as possible. So establishing the number of seconds or minutes or hours per month or per window that your service can be down or your site can be down or whatever application can be down is critically important, not just for the SRE team or infrastructure team or engineering team, but across the entire organization. So, SLOs and reliability are more than just targeting the percentage of downtime that, say, an endpoint has or a web page has, because that's not the only measure of customer satisfaction. It should be the percentage of time that an organization deems acceptable for a service to miss a customer expectation, for customers to be dissatisfied. So the complexity comes in determining what is the most impactful metric or combination of metrics that accurately measure that customer being dissatisfied. And while customers are certainly dissatisfied if a service or a web page is down, for instance, or if it returns a 500 error, that's often, just very simple. It's the complex situations where a customer might have excess latency, 10 plus seconds could be even more frustrating for a customer than if they receive an immediate 500 error, for instance. So measuring those kinds of things rather than just up and down, measuring performance and those metrics that impact performance are those key SLIs that we need to work on developing SLOs for, and that's where the complexity comes in.
Great, makes sense to me so far. Dylan, you want to talk about SLIs, the service level indicators, and how engineering plays a role in helping to craft those?
Yeah, absolutely, Kurt. I mean, an engineer has the most intimate knowledge of the code base, and engineers know exactly what they want to track and they know what they want to monitor, at least from the engineering perspective. In conjunction with product, they can kind of identify what is the critical path that product is going to play an important role for the customer to experience through. And then the engineers can kind of tandem that. They say, okay, this is what the customer's perspective we want to measure, and these are the specific metrics that I can encapsulate or leverage to successfully monitor and kind of bridge those two concepts together. So with the help of engineers and the product team and some of the infra level people, we can go back and we can define SLIs that are unique given these metrics that we're using for these specific applications to determine reliability versus velocity. And this is kind of like the symphony of information that an engineer might have. We have tons of dashboards and we have a lot of metrics all coming in, but if we carefully craft these SLIs and we pinpoint them to user journeys or to things that we want to encapsulate as a whole from the customer experience, this is where we get that very defined and practical approach to information for a team to determine whether they need to focus on reliability and velocity. I think that's really kind of the whole practice from an engineer when they're going in and developing these SLIs. There's obviously complexity in trying to find which one is best and which one is a better use case for measuring those. But I think over time, as you start to work and implement your SLIs, these are not set in stone, they're living, breathing entities. You'll continually recraft them to make them more in tune with what your customers are trying to capture and monitor, or what your customers are trying to experience throughout the product.
Sense. Nicolas, Dylan talked about this idea of constantly refining and improving, and I believe Dan mentioned it too as he talked. What's your perspective from a product manager sort of point of view about starting and then improving, as opposed to maybe having to have the one true final answer? I know that's kind of a loaded question, but can you talk about that progressive nature of doing SLOs?
Yes, and you heard Dan and who represent operation, and you heard Dylan, who represents engineering. And everybody cares about customer satisfaction at the end in the organization. That's a point I tried to make earlier, all the way to the CEO. Now, you're probably not going to have the CEO involved in identifying those SLIs, right? But the person that knows best the product along with engineering should be the product, which is me, for example, right, as a product owner. And so I get involved in this process of identifying those, choke points or potential areas in the application or the website that may affect customer satisfaction. And it could be, there's definitely more than one, because the richer your service is, the more touch points and critical touch points exist in your service. So we, as product manager, I'm very much involved with this process, as I said, and understanding, I understand what my customers are going through. I understand those choke points. And so the first step is to break down our website into different areas that have a start and a beginning and an end that match a customer experience. So put that portions, you need to focus on those portions that are basically very critical to the success and that may have a long time or long impact on that experience. So not every page on your website must be tracked, obviously. So what we did is that we started crafting a flow diagram with those key steps. And then you start working with engineering on the back end and say, okay, what part of the back end does serve those services on the front end? And it's very interesting how we came up with those flow diagrams, because once we had that, then we were able to pick, okay, these are the SLIs we're going to need. And that's where engineering comes in, like Dylan mentioned, where they identify those key points in the code where they need to identify what's the start and the end of that experience. So that's been kind of my contribution, and should be, I think, the contribution on any product team in this process.
So in a case where, let's say, you rely on a third party, yet another SaaS system to help accomplish a user journey, how do you instrument something like that? Maybe this is a good question. I don't know, Dylan or Dan, if you want to talk to that. Infrastructure or engineering, you both play a part in working with third-party services.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, at least initially. So I guess what I'll say is, in terms of third-party integrations, we at Blameless, we, for instance, have several third-party integrations, namely around our authentication service. So obviously, you're not going to be able to use our platform if you can't authenticate. So that is necessarily one of those critical service level indicators. So we have to measure a customer's and end users' ability to authenticate to our system, but authenticate in a timely fashion. So, and that's initially one of the first steps in a user journey that we'll talk about here briefly. But effectively, what we've done at Blameless is to, with external monitoring, we've used synthetic API tests as well as browser tests to instrument and test that authentication tier continuously or repeatedly as the first step in a user journey, and all the way through execution of our platform. Again, both via external synthetic API tests as well as browser tests. So that's one example of us exercising the third party in a critical part of that user journey.
Yeah, and into that too, one of the things I want to kind of echo is, the reality is we as engineers have a ton of managed services that we depend on every single day. And one of those things is you can't be more available than the services you depend on. And we try and monitor everything that we can, like Dan said, through synthetics or through routes that our system might use for external APIs to measure latency or availability. But the fact of the matter is you can't be more reliable. So you have to accommodate, you even have to fact check some of their SLOs or their I hate to say SLAs because that's not really what we're talking about here, but their SLOs to see, do they even meet what your desired expectation is as a company for availability? And if they don't, maybe you need to find alternative providers or something that might meet the objective that you're trying to stretch for right now.
Thanks. So Nicolas referred to the idea that even people all the way up to the CEO should be concerned about SLOs or in a broader sense, reliability. Could any of you talk about how you get that level of attention for reliability as a feature? Dan, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So I think many of us here are in software organizations or SaaS organizations. One of the key performance indicators for our line of work is customer churn. We don't want to have customers. We want customers to renew. We want customers to be happy, but we more importantly want them to return and be happy customers for years to come. So that customer churn is a KPI that, of course, the CEOs, chief revenue officers, sales teams are critically, are measuring very precisely. And, in our line of work, one of those things that, directly, drives churn, it's not the only thing, of course, but directly drives churn is customers being dissatisfied. So if they're dissatisfied because your platform is down, because the software doesn't work, because there are, too many bugs, because, performance is terrible, you will lose customers. So setting those SLO targets and making sure that the entire organization up to the CEO and including the CEO have visibility on those and feedback, not necessarily setting the SLIs and all of the details, but ensuring that you're meeting those targets and those are reasonable targets. That's critically important in this line of work, especially.
Thanks for talking about that. I'll make a pitch here that our Blameless has a section of the product called Reliability Insights, which is designed exactly to do that, is to surface these kinds of levels of metrics to whatever level of management you can get to pay attention to them. Ideally, like Dan said, all the way up the company to the top. So Nicolas talked in one of his early statements about the idea of error budgets and it being kind of the next level beyond just having an SLO. Dan, you want to tell us a little bit about what error budgets are and what they have to do with SLOs?
Yeah, sorry, trying to find the mute button. First and foremost around error budgets. They are a budget. In this case, it's a time budget, not necessarily a dollar budget, like financial budget, but it's the percentage of time that a team considers it acceptable for customer satisfaction to be potentially impacted. So your error budget represents the quantified amount of downtime or lower performance or lack of reliability that you're willing to allow during a rolling window. So each time your SLI check fails, or each time you throw a 500 error or have elevated latency, you're consuming some of that error budget. And in the nomenclature of our product, we consider that a bad value versus a good value, and we measure that in terms of that budget. And tracking this budget over time helps provide a projection of whether you can achieve your SLO for that window. And so you can see that trend and know and bubble up to those executives and to the rest of the organization whether you're on track to be successful for that window, or if you're you really have to make some potential changes or reevaluate reliability as a whole.
Okay, so we've been talking kind of about budgets and limits and thresholds, and part of the challenge here that I think people have is taking these abstract concepts and translating them into something very specific and practical. Dylan, you want to give us a really concrete example of Blameless, starting with a user journey for our product, potentially, and then how we would think about this through the whole process to get real numbers at the end?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Let's dive into it and go from one end to another. So let's talk about the product that we're talking about today. SLOs. One piece of our system that's really critical is actually backfilling the SLI data. When we want to generate a 28-day backfill for your system, you input an SLI metric and the system goes off and it pulls information from your external system. That's really critical because until that fully takes place and completes, you're not going to see an entire rolling window snapshot in our system. And that's, operating in the background and slowly updating the UI. So that's a pretty critical customer or pretty critical user journey. So I think what we would do is we'd identify, those specific entry points. For instance, we have one when an SLI is created, we have one when the backfill starts, and then we have one when the backfill completes. All of our data is pushed into Datadog. So we'd easily be able to, find these metrics within Datadog and build potentially a histogram to determine latency. So we want to see how long it takes an individual to be able to craft or be able to complete the SLI creation step. And then we want to potentially look at the availability of the backfill, because we want to make sure all of that data that we're pulling in is returning as we expected. And then at the end of that, we want to again check potentially the latency for when the backfill is completed and it's available to the front end. So that's kind of that user journey for SLI ingestion or creation to pulling metrics from our APM, which is Datadog, and then to visualize that to our system. We would go in and work with product to say, what's the availability? Since it's so critical, maybe we strive for 3 nines. Obviously, 4 and 5 is really aggressive, but 3 nines is a pretty consistent thing that a lot of companies strive for. And then we push it into our system and we'd get our error budget, and then we would set up our error budget policies to notify our teams when systems start to go, awire, or when customer satisfaction starts to dip. And that's my team's job to go in and start looking at reliability. And it also gives us information on, hey, we're doing great. Let's keep pushing out features and, continue on our velocity trend.
So let's circle back to Nicolas here for a minute as a product manager who serves in some ways as a representative of the customer to the company. And I'll just generalize that role to a certain degree. How do you decide what the right amount of unavailability is? How much is too much? And how do you tackle that question? I mean, 3 nines, 2.5 nines, 2 nines, or however you want to measure it. How do you find the right value?
It's going to be a little bit experimental, right? You won't get that, perfect number day one. You will obviously have, like Dylan mentioned, history about your operations. You're going to start implementing your metrics, starting to monitor with Datadog, and then say, okay, well, this is kind of typically what's happening. Okay, well, if you can see where you could set the bar, right, of what's happy latency and what's not happy latency, right? We call it a good event versus other events, right? So anything that would be so what I would do, even as a product guy, I can read a matrix, right, and then set latency, and we can see, okay, what anything below or above is good or not good average, and you start with that. Now, what we do really well is we allow you to calculate that SLO and convert it into an error budget, and that's where we come in, where we show you that total amount of hours or minutes that you give yourself to consume, right, as a team. So if this budget, you consume it rapidly, you probably either you set the bar too high, or you really have a problem and you need to address it, right?
Well, I got a question for you then. I mean, let's go back to the example that Dylan used of how long it takes to backfill the SLI data. How do you decide that threshold? How do you decide whether it should be 30 minutes or 10 minutes or 1 minute to do that backfill that will keep the customers happy? Because presumably if that customer was happy with 30 minutes, then they're going to still be happy or maybe ecstatic at 10. I don't know.
No, exactly. You said it yourself. It's we're not talking about real-time service here in the case of backfilling. So you have to understand, okay, when do you need to start making use of this data, right? When is the end, and how long the user is willing to wait. So if you say, 2 hours, that's probably way out there, right? You bring it down to, okay, is it 30 minutes? It's like, well, I want to see results quicker, but I'm willing to wait 4 or 5 minutes. That's okay, right? I can come back, get a cup of coffee, and see my data, right? So that's how we have the conversation, and we say, okay, well, 5 minutes seems to be reasonable, right? And then we set the bar for 5 minutes. So at that point, then we can see if it stays under 5 minutes, or it's been going, or it starts to go higher, right? And then we do all the things that we discussed earlier.
Okay, sounds good.
If I can jump in there, Kurt, I think
Please.
this is where it's critically important to engage more than just the engineering organization and even product organization. I think ensuring that customer success organization and support those individuals that receive feedback from customers that might never reach engineering or might reach engineering in the form of a ticket or something like that, that this process is taking too long. If the customer success managers and support have visibility on those SLOs and the SLO targets, and they look 100% green, but the customers are complaining, clearly there's a threshold that's off, and expectations need to be adjusted, or potentially changes to the product itself. But engaging with the customer success and support and any customer facing teams to get that feedback in the form of SLOs, I think is very valuable.
Perfect, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it matches exactly with some of the findings we had. Blameless recently did an SLO and SRE Practices Survey, and you can find that on our website if you go to the blameless.com/resources page and scroll down to the white papers section. But we allowed people to characterize their own organizations into beginning, intermediate, or advanced practices as far as it had to do with SLOs. And the interesting findings were the beginning and intermediate organizations struggled mostly with finding effective cross-functional processes where they could work with the broad range of people that need to provide input on SLOs. As opposed to the self-identified advanced teams, they made much wider use of direct customer input, as Dan was just talking about. They also look at a broader set of SLIs. They don't just look at errors or latency, but they also consider things like quality and freshness. The advanced teams also have much better cross-functional engagement. They use people from development, they use people from SRE, they use people from product. They also look at customer satisfaction and NPS scores, things along those lines. And for the advanced teams, their biggest problem are data silos. So parts of the organization that perhaps have data in one system versus another system, or systems that won't talk together easily. Those are the problems that the advanced organizations find themselves keeping them from going as far as they want with SLOs. Again, you can get a full copy of the report at our website, blameless.com/resources. Scroll down to the white papers section. Dan, since we are launching this new product offering, I'm guessing that you've been making use of it with your team. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's changed things for your team and how the implementation has been going?
Yes, absolutely. In the interest of reliability, I should mention that there's a major storm here in Atlanta. So if I lose power during this note, just bear with me. But yes, we've been operating as customer zero for our SLO product for a number of months, providing direct product feedback and working very closely with engineering and product organizations. It's been enlightening. We've been thought leaders in the SLO space and reliability space, but it's been enlightening seeing the visibility around our error budgets for a number of our services that weren't close to where we had expected, and have made some quite substantial changes to the way not only we operate, but also the way we provide the feedback to engineering and prioritize some reliability efforts. So reliability truly is one of the most important features that we offer, and the SLO product has been hugely beneficial in helping us to move that ball forward.
Thanks. So Nicolas talked about looking at your product offering as a whole, talking on behalf of our customers, for their services, or in our case, for our product. And then kind of understanding the critical choke points and critical actions that people have to take, such as login that Dylan mentioned. When you have kind of mapped out these user journeys, how do you then figure out ways to measure it? Because let's say you don't have, a metric. You want to measure something on your system, but you don't have a metric. What would you recommend people do with that? And do you just sort of throw your hands up and say, well, someday, maybe? Or do you go back to engineering and say, I've got this great thing that I think we ought to measure, and I can't figure out how? Any of you?
Yeah, I think you answered the question. I think it's a combination of both efforts there. If you don't have a metric and you want to measure something, obviously you need to send it to an APM so you can start measuring it. So it's a bit of like a chicken and egg, like which came first and how do you handle that problem? But realistically, you're constantly collaborating with product and engineering to determine what's the most beneficial thing for everyone as a company, all the way down to engineering, to monitor and measure. And once you've defined those and decided on what those might actually be, it's really the engineering job to go and figure out how we can best accomplish that. And most often than not, you don't have a metric. And really it's about, okay, what exactly are we wanting to measure? Is it latency? Is it correctness? Is it freshness? Is it durability, reliability? What is it? And then once you kind of fine tune into that, then you can start better pushing those pieces of information off into that APM so that you can go and do that. But I don't think at any point should you just blanketly apply tons of metrics all over the place so that you have them at one day when you might need them. In a world where, engineering is, the more data we have, the more informed we can be. SLOs kind of work in the opposite. The more SLOs you have, the more SLIs you have, the harder it is to truly drive to finding out whether or not you're directly impacting satisfaction, dissatisfaction, reliability, unreliability. So you want to keep those things tight. You want to keep that loop pretty close to the core critical paths that the user is going to go through for your platform, your product, and also make it easier on the team. If you have 100 SLOs and SLIs, it's going to be harder to manage than if you have 15 really, really good SLOs and good SLIs.
Excellent point. Excellent point. That's one of the benefits of taking an SLO-based approach, is that you can avoid having a plethora of thousands of metrics, such as typical APMs are loath to create. Just off a few services, you can easily have 10,000 metrics generated, and then finding the right one can be difficult. Let's see. I think that at this point, it's best to transition to Paul for the demo. I do want to mention, for anybody who's attending, we do invite your questions, so you can put them into the Q&A or in the chat, whichever you prefer on the webinar, while Paul runs through the demo. And for any of our customers who are watching this, we will be enabling the new SLO features on your instance of Blameless just after the webinar. So Paul, go ahead with the demo, please.
Awesome, thank you, Kurt. So as Kurt mentioned, we'll walk you through the latest and greatest in terms of what Blameless has to offer for customers, future customers. So again, like Kurt mentioned, if you have any questions, throw those into the chat, the Q&A. We'll have some people monitoring those and you can answer those afterwards. So this is essentially what our SLO portal will look like once you log into Blameless. I've already pre-populated some data here, so you'll see a lot of the features already showing. And we'll start here at the top with this summary bar. So the main thing that we want to do here with this summary bar is just to provide a quick high-level understanding of the status of our SLOs. And you'll see here that we break these down into depleted in more than 20 days, depleted between 20 and 5 days, less than 5 days, fully depleted, and inactive. So this is actually being tracked by Blameless in the sense that we are tracking the concept of an error budget burn rate. And I'll show you what that looks like displayed here in the UI. But one of the main concepts that we want to help kind of introduce to customers is, especially, and a lot of our panelists mentioned this, especially in a world where there's tons of metrics and tons of indicators out there, you want to have it so that your SLOs will be laser focused on what your users or what your customers are experiencing when they do interact with your application. So we're going to walk through what it looks like creating a user journey and all the different elements to that. But before I do that, just give you an idea of what types of information we can provide here. I'm just selecting, and I dropped down this one user journey to show you what the SLOs look like from a high level perspective. So we take a look at the SLOs here. We'll have them all listed, and we'll show you some more context around what type of SLI we're using here, what your current reliability target is, your current service level, so where you're currently at, the status of that, and we'll talk about this in a second. And then more importantly, this error budget, little gray area, which is going to show you how much error budget you have remaining, what the current burn rate of that SLO is. So that way we can then calculate the amount of runway you have, which is that final third column, showing you at the current burn rate, if the activity is consistent across the next kind of 30 to 60 days, this is the amount of runway you have left based off of that burn rate. So currently the burn rate will be calculated over a course of 28 days. So that way you can go ahead and understand that third column there in terms of how much time you have left there. So with that being said, let me go ahead and jump into the user journey creation wizard here. So what we've done here is we've essentially allowed for users to create their user journeys directly from the UI with this wizard. And of course, up until this point, the assumption is that you'll already have had those conversations with your development team, your engineering team, SREs, product, customer success, all multiple facets of the organization, so that you're all aligned from a cultural standpoint. And once you've understood and you're all aligned, you understand kind of the critical user journey paths for your applications, this is where we can start kind of inputting that data for you to see and track within Blameless. So in this case, we'll go and give this a name. We'll just call this a checkout flow. And then we intentionally keep the definition text area quite large, mainly to push documentation. So this way, let's say I'm creating this user journey and someone else on the team or someone new who joins the team wants to understand what user journeys we have. This is going to be a way for them to quickly understand what the context and the reasoning behind this user journey is. So we'll just say, and we'll assume that we've added the definition here. I'll go ahead and assign this to myself, and then we'll go ahead and jump into the next screen. So at this point, we'll want to then select our SLI or service level indicator. So there's two areas of this page. And the first is that if you already have your SLIs pre-configured within the Blameless instance, you'll see all the existing SLIs here in this list. And then if you want to filter this out based off of the service, you can go and simply select the service to go and reduce the amount of SLIs you're seeing there. Now, let's say that we don't have the SLI created already. You've taken that into consideration, and you can go ahead and directly create a new SLI from this view. So I'm going to go ahead and click that button, and this will take us into our SLI creation view. Now, at this point, same concepts. We'll go and give this a name. We keep that definition field big. So again, trying to push that culture of documentation. And then you'll see the various SLI types. And then once I select that, we'll be able to select our data source. So we'll just say this is going to be our payment service. And you put in your definition here. And then when you go and select your SLI type, we'll just say latency. This will then provide me with a dropdown of all of our connected data sources. So today you'll see there Prometheus, Datadog, New Relic, and Pingdom will be the ones that we have out of the box. If you are using those solutions today. For the ones that we don't currently have out of the box, you can always leverage our Blameless API until we actually have those various data sources as an integration point out of the box within Blameless. So for now, we'll go and select Datadog. And then this is where I'll be able to enter in my value metric or my metric string. So one of the latest things that we've done here is we've actually implemented a metric validation feature. So that way, as you're putting in the actual metric strings here, and I'm just going to copy and paste this one, this is then going to tell me whether or not this is a valid metric. And you'll see that we have a green check mark, good to go, we can move forward. But if not, it'll then tell me that, hey, for some reason, this metric string that you've entered in isn't showing any data for the last 30 minutes, right? So this is a great way to make sure that, whether it's a copy and paste issue or just a metric string that isn't going to give you any data, we've gone ahead and taken that into consideration to make you as successful as you can on the first try. So we'll go ahead and enter that in there. And the final step is just for kind of organization purposes, making sure that we have that newly created SLI associated with the service. So I'll go ahead and select the service and I can move forward at this point. So the final step is to actually start implementing the parameters around this SLO. So again, we'll go and give this a name. We'll call this payment service. The next field will be around the reliability. So your target, how many nines you'd want to have associated with this. We already talked about a lot of important ideas and concepts when you're tackling SLOs for the first part. So you might want to be a little bit more loose or kind of more lax on this initiative go around. Just kind of see how it goes for the next 28 days and then adjust from there, since this is of course going to be an iterative process. So we'll just say 90% is going to be our reliability target. You'll see here below there, that's then going to calculate your total error budget over a course of 28 days. The next thing will then be to select the threshold value. So this way we can say, for any request that comes back that exceeds, and we'll just say 100 milliseconds, we'll want that to be deemed as a not good metric. So that way we can go ahead and tell Blameless how to start burning down that error budget that you have for this SLO. Again, all meant to be iterative. So once you create this now, you can always come back and revisit this when it makes sense. And the last piece is going to be around the SLO status and the error budget policy. Now we'll have 3 statuses here. Basically, the main takeaway is that, again, because we want to be revisiting these SLOs, you can come back and adjust these. But until we move this to testing or active, we'll then be able to start actually implementing the burning down of your error budget and actually activating the error budget policy. So if you're not ready yet to go ahead and have this in a production state, you can go ahead and leave this in development, just monitor it for a little bit, see how you're doing. And then once you're ready and everything is kind of fine-tuned, you can move this to the next statuses that you see fit. And then from here, we'll be able to select our error budget policy. The main thing to take away from the policy is that this is a way for Blameless to be able to notify yourself, your team members, that something is happening with this particular SLO. We'll jump into some more details around what this looks like, how you can configure this, but you do have this here so that you can be more proactive with a lot of these different metrics that we're tracking within Blameless. So at this point, let me go ahead and cancel all of this. I have some SLOs already created. So we'll go and take a look at one that we have populated already. Go back to the user journeys, and we'll take a look at this first SLO here. So once we have everything configured, this is going to be the final product. So we'll have a variety of different graphs here for you to review. But the main thing is that, especially if you are an SRE or if you have a role similar to that in your organization, they'll be able to leverage this graph here to understand. And the simple use case that you might always hear is, hey, we have a pretty big release coming out. Now, are we in a state where we can actually push change into our production environment? So you can essentially use this graph and have this data to then help back your decisions on whether you'd want to move faster by pushing out that particular update, or if you want to kind of slow down a little bit, let your error budget replenish, because based off of this information, our customers are experiencing not the ideal kind of experience that we'd want them to have. So this is meant to be here to help you make those decisions, and not kind of based off of gut feel. So you can go ahead and leverage this here. Now, what you'll notice that we have this little comment bubble, and this is going to allow you to then annotate this error budget as you're moving forward and having these discussions. So, for example, if if there was some sort of planned maintenance where you see your error budget depleting a little bit, this is a way for you to then add those comments here to go ahead and incorporate that, so that, again, let's say if someone from the C-suite comes in and wants to take a look at this, they won't just see a big spike downwards. They'll be able to see kind of the context behind what this activity is telling us. So this way, again, just to make sure that we have everything documented, you can go ahead and start distributing that information across the board instead of having it siloed. The next 2 graphs that we'll look at here, just to give you some more details around why we're seeing this behavior with our error budget visual at the top there. So this is going to essentially give you some more details around what the good events are versus the valid events. And that'll give you some more context on why we're seeing that activity, those spikes, those dips in terms of the air budget. And then the last one is more of a zoomed out lens, right? So we had kind of repeatedly mentioned always improving and always iterating on your SLOs. So going back to the point around, when we do look at our SLOs, we want to make sure that we are aligned not only from product, engineering, development, SRE, but also from the customer facing side of the organization, the support teams, the customer success teams, just to make sure that if we're seeing everything green within our SLOs, is that aligned with what our customers are expecting? If not, that means that you need to be more aggressive with your SLOs. So that way you have a better idea, better gauge of what your customers are experiencing from their perspective. So again, you can always go ahead and adjust the target of your reliability just based off of that feedback and that collaborative effort. So the last piece I'll go into is our air budget policy. Just to give you an idea of what will happen here. So you can create multiple policies. I just have a low, medium, high priority air budget policy. And this way we can then tell Blameless how they want to notify us. You'll see here that with those various thresholds, it'll essentially be 25, 50, 75%, 100. And then you can go ahead and specify how you'd want Blameless to notify. So whether it be via email, via Slack, and then we'll talk about this last option here in a second. So you can come in here and then say, okay, maybe for 25 and 50%, we don't have to do anything, especially for this low priority air budget policy. Once it hits 75%, I want to go ahead and send a Slack notification. This way, you can go ahead and start having more of a proactive approach when dealing with a lot of these different issues, right? The main goal that we want to help our customers do is that they have a more proactive approach and have visibility as the actual service could be potentially degrading. So you can go ahead and get ahead of that before it becomes a larger issue, which leads us to our third option, which is going to be creating blameless incidents. So for those who aren't familiar with Blameless, and this is the first time you're seeing this, we do also have another portion of our product where we can help your organization with running incidents in a more automated fashion, providing structure so that your responders can quickly understand what needs to happen, how frequently to notify customers or external stakeholders, and then making it much easier for you to create blameless postmortems. So the main goal that we want to do there is that with the SLOs, without any sort of actionable next step, it could potentially be lost. So we want to make it so that it ties into the rest of your process around dealing with incidents, making sure you can resolve those quicker, and ultimately keeping your customers happy. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw those into the chat if you haven't already. Happy to answer those. But at this point, let me hand this back over to Kurt and the rest of our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Great demo. Again, we're so excited to be releasing this to our customers today, and it should be showing up in your customer instance soon, if not already. A couple of things to mention. We have a variety of additional flexibility features that are going to be coming to help improve different aspects of this over the next 6-8 weeks. So this will continue to evolve, and feedback from customers is definitely of interest to us. If you have particular APM integrations that you're really invested in, we'd love to hear about them, to consider them for potential out-of-the-box integrations. In the meantime, as Paul's demo showed, there is an API endpoint that you can use for any data source that you have in-house, custom, whatever it is. And the SLO product in general has been built with the open API, previously known as the Swagger specification. So you can do a lot through the API for the product. Let's have a last round of comments here. So far, there's no questions, but this would be a great time if anyone does have questions to throw them into the Q&A. Dan, would you like to lead off with any last comments before we have time for Q&A?
Sure. I want to just reiterate that we're so pleased to be launching this today. So much has gone into this. A lot of work from Dylan's team and Nicolas's team, and my team has seen so much value from the SLO product that we're thrilled to be able to launch it, share it with the public, but also receive the feedback and continue to see the enhancements in the product, because I really do think that it's been dramatically impactful and important to my team, and as such, perhaps yours.
Dylan or Nicolas?
I don't have much to add. Obviously, my team dog foods this product every day. We're constantly trying to make it better. Nicolas is constantly working with us to come up with new ideas to bring to the market and expand on making people's lives easier and better and more impactful using this product. So really excited to see this actually GA and released to everyone. Really appreciate all the work Paul did into the demonstration, and just every panelist here giving their input, providing feedback and experience using the product, and just really excited.
Nicolas?
Yeah, same here. I can't wait for people to get started, using and practicing all the things that we've discussed today. I hope you really enjoyed the conversation and all the best practice, and recommendations that we made all along this. I think there was a lot of good ideas that came through. We wanted to share our own experience in using this platform, and I can't wait to hear from you guys using our product. So please go ahead and you will see it enabled soon in your for existing customers on your platform, and we're looking forward to show it and demo it further to our new customers. So thank you very much.
On behalf of Blameless, we're excited to have SRE teams all around the world start making use of this and be able to move from reactive to proactive to get ahead of problems. And remember, it's a process of continuous and never-ending improvement. So you start somewhere, and in 1 month, 6 months, 6 years, you'll be in a whole different place. But you have to start somewhere, and we hope that this can help you on your journey to be more effective and make a better, reliable experience for your customers in return. There are no questions, but we can wait for just a minute and see if anybody wants to throw a question to us. Otherwise, we will wrap up just a few minutes early. So, questions came in. One of the challenges after an incident is the socialization of learnings. How does Blameless help capture those learnings during an incident and then afterwards by easily socializing? And okay, 3 questions here. Second question, how does our pricing model work? And the third question is, the SLI service is as reliable as the third-party providers that track the SLIs. How do you ensure that the metrics collected are fresh? How are you resilient to third-party outages? So I think probably for the first 2 questions that came in there, it would be best to talk to somebody in our sales organization about the details on, and Paul, I'm sure would love to give you a demo of our incident response and retrospective aspects of the product to talk about learnings. But to talk about dealing with the reliability or lack thereof of your third-party metrics providers, Dylan, you want to give a shot at that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really valid question. I don't know if you saw in that graph, but we have information showing you the events that we're actually receiving ingest into our system. Generally, massive outages for big services like this are pretty far and few in between. But when they do happen, there's going to be kind of a cascading effect. There's no way that our system can try to replace an APM if your APM goes down. But what our system tries to do is create points in time or checkpoints so that when something goes down and then it comes back up, we're able to get all of the data that might have been missed in that period of time. And that's the same with any APM. They have an agent it uses and stores information until the APM service comes back online and then pushes data. That's the way that we kind of retroactively try to or manage any outages or ensure that the data actually gets into our system if something does take place. How do we ensure metrics collected are fresh? Really, the way we ensure metrics are collected is fresh are We collect metrics every 7 minutes. So every 7 minutes, our system goes out and we pull that information. Those metrics are dependent on the freshness of your APM provider. Again, we're not an APM provider. We're only leveraging the data that you're directly sending to us. So if you were using our API, the freshness would be dependent on the service that you're pushing data from to us. How are you resilient to third-party outages? Just like I said in the last thing, it's really creating checkpoints, ensuring that our system, if things do go down, if chaos does happen in our system, we have a way to mitigate any chaos that might happen, and we come back online successfully and able to push that data from a previous point in time as a checkpoint into our system and then get you back up to speed. I don't know if that answers everything, but that is my best attempt at answering that question.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer, Dylan. I'll also point out that it's important to be sensitive to the concept of white box monitoring, where you're measuring from the inside. That's typically what APMs are doing. And they're going to be looking at how services are performing from either within the service or within your own data center instance, virtual or physical. Black box monitoring is coming from the outside. So it's using some sort of external source to check, probably in a way that's slightly more reminiscent of what a customer might be encountering with your service. And it's important to pair the two and balance them as you're structuring your SLOs, so that you aren't, let's say your CDN goes down, if you have a CDN. Internally, all your services are functioning fabulously, but your customer is not seeing anything because the CDN that's supposed to serve up your static assets is down. So you'd never see that if you only looked at it from in-house, an in-house white box perspective. So just bear some of those complexities in mind as you think about instrumenting your services. Any other questions? Or we'll wrap up with a minute early.
One thing I wanted to add to what you said as well, Kurt, is that SLOs are forecasted data, right? We use SLOs as a forecast forward, and we use SLOs as a historical forecast backwards. So there's never a point in time where you should be looking at your SLO as a real-time monitor, right? And that's why we have things on a scheduled cadence of 7 minutes. So the difference there is, Kurt really pointed out, white box versus black box. Black box is a governance that you retroactively go back and look at, or you might look at a snapshot in point in time. And that's how our system really works.
In that case, thank you all for joining us here for our launch webinar. If you have questions, please do reach out. Our sales team would love to talk to you. Paul can walk through another demo and spend a little bit more time with you if you like, or you want to see other parts of our product. And on behalf of everyone at Blameless, thank you for attending our SLO launch webinar. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.